Reginald Reggie Hayes navigated the familiar, winding drive up to the sprawling Gates estate. The quiet hum of his sedan, a stark contrast to the thrumming anxiety in his chest. His polished, almost new boots, a gift from his younger sister, felt heavy on the dusty floorboards of his reliable but aging car. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting warmth, felt oppressive today, baking the silence that settled over the luxurious, manicured lawns. He was here for the annual Gates Foundation Charity Gala, an event he usually approached with a detached, professional air. Today, however, a sense of unease gnawed at him, a premonition of something unexpected. Just as he was about to pull into the designated parking area, a sudden, jarring movement in his rearview mirror made him flinch. A figure, small and hunched, emerged from the dense shadows of the estate's outer wall. It was a young boy, no older than 15, with tattered clothes and eyes that held the weary resignation of an old man. He was carrying a worn backpack, its straps digging into his thin shoulders, and for a fleeting second, Reggie's heart lurched. The boy wasn't just walking, he was limping, favoring one leg, a silent testament to hardships Reggie could only imagine. Reggie, a man known for his astute business sense and his carefully curated public persona, felt a surprising tremor in his hands. He was a self-made billionaire, his empire built on quiet innovation and a relentless work ethic, but he rarely allowed himself to be swayed by raw emotion. Yet, the sight of the boy, clearly homeless and vulnerable, stirred something deep within him, a forgotten echo from his own humble beginnings. He had pulled into a space, but his eyes were still on the boy, who now hesitated at the edge of the perfectly paved drive, seemingly lost between the opulent world of the gala and the desolate reality he inhabited. A liveried attendant, with a crisp, unyielding posture, was already striding towards the boy, a silent signal of unwelcome. Reggie watched, a knot tightening in his stomach, as the attendant's hand, impeccably gloved, gestured dismissively, clearly telling the boy to leave. The boy, in turn, simply lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping further. It was a tableau of stark contrast, the pristine white of the attendant's uniform against the boy's grimy clothes, the silent disdain of the elite world clashing with the quiet desperation of the humble. Reggie, almost without conscious thought, found himself opening his car door. The soft click resonated in the sudden quiet of the evening, drawing a momentary glance from the attendant, who quickly dismissed him as just another arriving guest. He walked towards the boy, his polished boots crunching softly on the gravel. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion, like a cornered animal. "Hey there," Reggie said, his voice softer than he intended, a subtle surprise to even himself. "You all right?" The boy simply nodded, a barely perceptible movement. His face was smudged with dirt, and a faint bruise marred his left cheekbone. He looked too young, too fragile, to be out on his own. The attendant, now sensing a disruption to the smooth flow of the gala's entrance, cleared his throat pointedly. "Sir, if you're looking for parking, it's further down. This area is for guests only." His tone was polite but firm, an invisible wall erected between the two worlds. Reggie ignored him, his gaze fixed on the boy. "What's your name, son?" he asked. The boy hesitated, then mumbled. "Jamal." His voice was hoarse, as if unused to speaking. Reggie felt a prickle of something akin to recognition, a faint memory stirring from a long-buried past. Jamal's eyes, though wary, held a quiet intelligence, a spark that resonated with Reggie's own inner strength. He saw not just a homeless teen, but a resilient spirit, a flicker of something unbreakable. "Jamal," Reggie repeated, letting the name settle between them. "Are you hungry?" The question hung in the air, a simple offer that felt profoundly significant in the grand setting. Jamal's eyes darted towards the glittering mansion, then back to Reggie, a flicker of hope battling with ingrained distrust. He didn't answer directly, but his stomach gave a faint rumble, betraying his silence. Reggie reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet. The leather was smooth and expensive, a stark contrast to the worn fabric of Jamal's backpack. He withdrew a crisp $100 bill. "Here," he said, extending it. "Get yourself something to eat." Jamal stared at the bill, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He didn't reach for it immediately. The attendant, clearly exasperated, stepped forward. "Sir, I must insist. This is a private event. You cannot engage with vagrants." His voice was sharper now, the polite veneer cracking. Reggie's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, his gaze leveling on the attendant. "And I must insist," he replied, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "that you remember your manners. This young man is not a vagrant. He is a human being." The attendant blanched slightly, recognizing the steel in Reggie's voice, the quiet power that radiated from him. He knew instinctively that he was dealing with someone of consequence, not just another wealthy guest. The silence that followed was loud, filled with unspoken tension. Jamal, still unmoving, watched the exchange, his young face a mask of bewilderment. He had likely encountered countless rejections, but rarely such an unexpected defense. Reggie turned back to Jamal, pushing the bill gently into his hand. "Go on," he encouraged. "Get yourself a proper meal." Jamal's fingers brushed against Reggie's, and the brief touch was electric, a bridge between their vastly different worlds. He finally took the money, his hand trembling slightly, just as Jamal was about to turn and leave. A sudden, piercing voice cut through the air. "Jamal!" A woman's frantic cry echoed from the direction of the main road, and a disheveled figure, her clothes stained and her hair wild, stumbled into view. Her eyes, wide with a desperate fear, fixed on Jamal. "Jamal, thank goodness. I thought I'd lost you." She rushed towards him, embracing him fiercely, her body shaking with relief. Reggie watched, a new layer of confusion settling over him. This woman, clearly as destitute as Jamal, seemed to be his mother. But why was she here? And why was Jamal alone? The attendant, seeing another undesirable emerge, groaned audibly. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered under his breath, reaching for his walkie-talkie. Reggie, however, felt a different pull. The woman's embrace, raw and genuine, spoke volumes about their shared struggle. A poignant counterpoint to the calculated displays of wealth surrounding them. The woman, still clinging to Jamal, finally looked up, her gaze meeting Reggie's. Her eyes, though weary, held a surprising depth, a quiet dignity despite her circumstances. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice raspy. For helping my boy," she gestured to the $100 bill. In Jamal's hand, a flicker of surprise evident in her eyes. "He doesn't usually take from strangers," Reggie nodded, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "He seemed in need," he simply stated. "Is he all right?" The woman sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound. "He's been through a lot." "We both have. We're trying to get to the city shelter." "His little sister is there." Her voice cracked on the last words. "His sister?" Reggie's question was soft, almost a whisper. The image of a disabled child, a distant memory from his own past, flashed through his mind. A profound sense of empathy, unexpected and overwhelming, washed over him. "Yes," the woman confirmed, her gaze dropping to the ground. She's in a wheelchair, born with spina bifida. We got separated at the last shelter. I've been looking for them both for days." Her voice was laced with a desperate urgency. Reggie's mind raced. A disabled child, separated from her family, on the streets, the carefully constructed walls around his heart, built over years of business dealings and detached philanthropy, began to crumble. He looked at Jamal, who, despite his own exhaustion, was now gently patting his mother's back, a gesture of quiet comfort beyond his years. This was not a simple case of homelessness. This was a family ripped apart, vulnerable and desperate. The attendant, still hovering, looked increasingly agitated. "Sir, I really must ask you to move along. The guests are arriving." His voice was clipped, a thinly veiled threat. Reggie ignored him again. He turned to the woman. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked, his voice steady. "Lila," she replied, her eyes welling up. "Lila May." The name hung in the air, imbued with the weight of a mother's love and fear. Reggie made a decision, swift and unhesitating. It was a decision that would undoubtedly disrupt his carefully planned evening, but one that felt undeniably right. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out his car keys. "Get in," he said, gesturing to his luxury sedan. The woman and Jamal looked at him, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. "Sir?" the attendant sputtered, his face a mask of shocked indignation. "Are you insane? You can't just pick up strangers." Reggie's gaze, when it landed on the attendant, was cold and unwavering. "Watch me," he said, his voice laced with an authority that left no room for argument. "My guests tonight are these two. You, sir, will find me another parking space, and then you will ensure that not another soul bothers them." The attendant, sensing the shift in power dynamics, his face paling, nodded mutely. He knew now that he had overstepped, that this was no ordinary guest. Reggie opened the back door of his car. "Come on," he urged, his voice gentler now. "We're going to get Lila." The woman, still in shock, slowly led Jamal towards the car. Jamal, with a last hesitant glance at the opulent mansion, climbed into the back seat, his tattered backpack resting on the plush leather. His mother followed, a silent tear tracing a path down her grimy cheek. The contrast was stark, broken. Sneakers on expensive floor mats, weary bodies on luxurious upholstery. A silent testament to a world turned upside down. Reggie got back into the driver's seat, the quiet hum of the engine now a comforting sound. He bypassed the designated guest parking and instead drove towards the estate service entrance, a less conspicuous route. The attendant, now chastened, was already on his radio, arranging for Reggie's car to be moved. As Reggie drove, the silence in the car was different. It wasn't the oppressive quiet from before, but a pregnant pause, filled with unspoken stories and burgeoning hope. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Jamal and his mother. Jamal was looking out the window, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights, a thoughtful expression on his young features. His mother had leaned back, her eyes closed, as if the sheer relief of being in a safe space was overwhelming. Reggie realized he didn't even know her name. "I'm Reggie Hayes," he said, breaking the silence. "And you are?" "Sarah," she replied, opening her eyes. "Sarah Jenkins. And thank you, Mr. Hayes. I don't know what to say." Her voice was thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Reggie replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Just tell me where this shelter is." Sarah gave him directions, her voice gaining a little strength as she spoke of Lila, detailing her daughter's quiet strength, her resilience in the face of her disability. Reggie listened, a profound sense of purpose settling over him. The charity gala, with its polished speeches and polite networking, seemed trivial now. This was real philanthropy, a direct intervention, a tangible act of kindness. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a warmth spreading through his chest that had been absent from many of his grander, more public gestures of generosity. They arrived at the city shelter, a drab, utilitarian building that stood in stark contrast to the opulent mansion they had just left. The air here was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and unspoken hardship. Reggie, usually accustomed to private entrances and exclusive access, felt a momentary jolt of discomfort as he stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching under his polished boots. Sarah, with a newfound energy, rushed inside, Jamal following closely behind. Reggie waited by the car, a conspicuous figure in his designer suit amidst the weary faces of the shelter's residents. He observed the comings and goings, the quiet despair, the flashes of unexpected camaraderie. He saw a young boy, no older than 7, offer his half-eaten sandwich to an even younger girl, a simple act of shared poverty that spoke volumes of human kindness. This was the humble world, raw and unvarnished, yet undeniably rich in its own way. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Reggie resisted the urge to check his expensive watch, instead focusing on the sounds of the shelter, the muted chatter, the occasional wails of a child, the creak of an opening door. Finally, Sarah emerged, a radiant smile transforming her tired face. Beside her, in a worn but functional wheelchair, was a small girl with bright, inquisitive eyes and a head full of tightly coiled braids. Lila May. Her smile was infectious, a beacon of pure joy amidst the shelter's dim lighting. Jamal was pushing her wheelchair, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The sight of them together, reunited, sent a wave of emotion through Reggie. He felt a sting behind his eyes, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Lila looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, and offered a shy, angelic smile. Reggie knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Hello, Lila May," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Your MOM told me a lot about you." Lila giggled, a sweet, melodic sound. She reached out a small hand, and Reggie instinctively took it. Her tiny fingers, surprisingly strong, wrapped around his much larger ones. In that moment, the world outside, with its galas and its boardrooms, faded away. All that mattered was the warmth of her hand, the innocent trust in her eyes. Sarah, standing beside them, cleared her throat. "Mr. Hayes, Lila." "She doesn't usually warm up to strangers so quickly," Reggie smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I think we have something in common, Lila May," he said, a playful glint in his eye. "We both know what it's like to be underestimated." Lila's eyes widened, and she let out another giggle. Reggie stood up, his gaze sweeping over the family. The reunion was bittersweet, shadowed by the harsh reality of their homelessness. "Listen," he began, his voice taking on a more decisive tone. "You can't stay here. Not tonight. I have a car, and, well, I know a place." Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mr. Hayes, we couldn't possibly impose." Reggie cut her off. "It's not an imposition. Consider it a change of plans for my evening. I was supposed to be at a rather boring gala anyway." He winked, and a faint smile touched Sarah's lips. He didn't mention the private ceremony, the exclusive awards, the important networking that was now completely derailed. He simply knew he had to help them. This was the right thing, and he was doing it in front of a wrong crowd, the weary, often judged residents of the shelter, and perhaps even the judging eyes of his own conscience. He led them back to his car. Getting Lila's wheelchair into the spacious trunk was a bit of a challenge, a task he wouldn't normally undertake, but he handled it with a quiet determination. Jamal helped, his young strength surprising. As they drove away from the shelter, a sense of quiet accomplishment settled over Reggie. He wasn't taking them to his own mansion. That would be too much too soon, too jarring a contrast. Instead, he steered towards a discreet, high-end hotel he owned across town, one known for its anonymity and impeccable service. The staff there were trained to handle unusual requests with discretion. He had already called ahead, arranging for a suite with accessible features, the kind of meticulous planning he usually reserved for major business deals. The hotel lobby, with its hushed elegance and soft lighting, was a world away from the shelter. The doorman, accustomed to Reggie's infrequent, unannounced visits, merely nodded respectfully as they entered. Sarah and Jamal, their eyes wide, looked around in awe. Lila, nestled comfortably in her wheelchair, seemed to take it all in with an unblinking curiosity. Reggie spoke to the concierge in low tones, explaining the situation without revealing too much. The concierge, a man who had seen it all in his years of service, simply offered a small, knowing smile and handed Reggie the key card. He had seen the quiet acts of kindness from the wealthy, the moments when their privilege was used for something genuinely good. Up in the suite, Sarah gasped. It was more luxurious than anything she had ever imagined. A haven of soft carpets, plush furniture, and a panoramic view of the city lights. Lila let out a delighted squeal, pointing at the large flat-screen television. "We're going to stay here," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Reggie nodded. "For as long as you need, and there's room service, whatever you'd like to eat." He saw the tears welling in Sarah's eyes, and he quickly changed the subject. "Jamal, there's a desk here if you need to do any schoolwork. And Lila, there are movies on demand." He was awkward with expressions of direct emotion, but his actions spoke volumes. He handed Sarah a credit card. "This is for anything you need while you're here. No limits." Sarah stared at the card, her hand trembling as she took it. It was a tangible symbol of a sudden, unimaginable shift in their lives. Reggie left them to settle in, promising to check on them in the morning. As he drove back to his mansion, the car felt lighter, the burden he hadn't realized he was carrying lifted. The Gates gala was undoubtedly in full swing, the air filled with the clinking of glasses and the drone of self-congratulatory speeches. He felt no regret. In fact, a profound sense of peace settled over him. He had done something real, something that truly mattered. When he arrived home, his butler, a stoic man named Thomas, greeted him at the door. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes. The gala was quite the event, I hear." Reggie merely offered a small, private smile. "Something far more important came up, Thomas." Thomas, a man of few words but keen observation, simply nodded, a faint glimmer of understanding in his eyes. The next morning, Reggie returned to the hotel. He found Sarah and Lila already awake, and Jamal, surprisingly, immersed in a textbook. At the desk, the suite, though still luxurious, had a warmth to it now, a lived-in feel. Lila, seeing Reggie, immediately beamed, and held out her arms for a hug. Reggie, uncharacteristically, knelt and embraced her, the soft weight of her small body a comforting presence. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice genuinely concerned. "Like a dream," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with a rested glow. "And Jamal, he's already talking about looking for a library." Jamal looked up, a shy smile on his face. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice stronger, more confident than the day before. This is more than we could have ever hoped for." Reggie spent the next few days checking in on them, quietly arranging for doctor's appointments for Lila, new clothes, and even enrolling Jamal in a local community program that offered tutoring and skills training. He also put his extensive network to work, discreetly searching for a long-term, stable housing solution for the family. He saw the transformation in them daily, Sarah's shoulders losing their perpetual slump, Jamal's eyes gaining a spark of youthful ambition, and Lila's laughter echoing through the suite, a melody of pure joy. One afternoon, while visiting, Reggie noticed a faint, almost invisible scar on Jamal's forearm. It was thin and jagged, clearly old. A sudden, vivid memory flashed in Reggie's mind. A moment from his own childhood. A similar scar on his own arm, sustained during a desperate attempt to fix a broken-down car with whatever scraps he could find. Jamal, Reggie said, his voice thoughtful. Do you know anything about cars? Jamal looked up, surprised by the question. A little, sir, he replied hesitantly. My dad, before he used to fix them, taught me some things. Reggie nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. He had an old classic car, a vintage Ford Mustang, that had been sitting in his garage for years, needing a complete overhaul. He had always intended to have it restored, but had never found the time or the right person. Would you be interested in taking a look at my car sometime? Reggie asked. It's a bit of a project. Jamal's eyes lit up, a genuine excitement, replacing his usual quiet reserve. Really? I'd love to. Mr. Hayes, this was a secret skill revealed, a quiet talent that had been hidden by circumstance. A few days later, Reggie drove Jamal to his sprawling garage. The Mustang, covered in a thick layer of dust, looked forlorn. Jamal approached it with a quiet reverence, his fingers tracing the contours of the faded paint. He popped the hood, and his expression became focused, almost intense. He spent hours there, meticulously examining the engine, cleaning parts, and explaining, in surprisingly articulate detail, what needed to be done. Reggie watched, fascinated. This wasn't just a boy. This was a budding mechanic, a craftsman in the making. Jamal wasn't asking for money, wasn't looking for a handout. He was simply immersed in his passion, a quiet dignity in his work. Reggie saw a reflection of his own early ambition, the drive to create, to fix, to build. Word of Reggie's unusual house guests, though initially kept under wraps, inevitably began to spread within his inner circle. Whispers turned to mild disapproval, then to outright concern from some of his more conservative business partners. Reggie, dear boy, one of them, a stern-faced financier named Arthur Penhaligon, had said over an exclusive dinner, "Are you sure this isn't a liability? You a public figure?" Reggie had simply smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. Arthur, some liabilities are worth taking on. The next major public event Reggie was scheduled to attend was the annual Philanthropic Leadership Summit, a prestigious gathering of the world's most influential and charitable figures. Reggie was slated to give the keynote address. He knew it would be the perfect platform for a certain kind of statement. The summit hall was a grand affair, adorned with silk banners and elaborate floral arrangements. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition. Reggie, impeccably dressed, stood on the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, billionaires, CEOs, judges, and philanthropists, all gathered to discuss the future of global giving. He began his speech with the usual pleasantries, the carefully crafted words about innovation and impact. But then, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. A profound silence fell over the crowded room, the kind that happens when an unexpected chord is struck. Tonight, Reggie began, his voice resonating with a quiet power. I want to share a different kind of story. Not about grand institutions or monumental grants, but about a single act of kindness. He then recounted, in measured, heartfelt tones, the story of meeting Jamal and Sarah, the desperate search for Lila, and the quiet dignity of a family facing unimaginable hardship. He spoke of Jamal's quiet strength, his unwavering support for his mother and sister, and his surprising talent for mechanics. He spoke of Lila's infectious joy, her spirit undimmed by her challenges. As he spoke, a palpable shift occurred in the room. The polite smiles of the elite began to falter, replaced by expressions of genuine interest, then quiet contemplation. Some people shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the implicit challenge in his words. This wasn't about tax write-offs or public image. This was about raw human connection. He then spoke of the judge, a formidable woman named Judge Eleanor Vance, who is known for her strict adherence to the law and her often impersonal rulings in family court cases. especially those involving homelessness. She was in the audience, a prominent figure in the front row, and Ricky met her gaze directly. We, as a society, Ricky continued, his voice rising slightly, often define value by wealth, by power, by public achievement. But I have learned, in the most profound way, that true value lies in quiet strength, in selfless acts, in the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their circumstances. He paused, letting his words sink in. And it is often in the most unexpected places, in the humble world, that we find the greatest lessons in kindness and resilience. Then he made a bold move. Tonight, Reggie announced, his voice clear and resonant, I want to introduce you to someone who embodies this quiet strength. Someone who, despite immense hardship, never lost his spirit, his kindness, or his inner resolve. Someone who reminded me of the true meaning of generosity, not of money, but of self. The doors at the back of the hall opened, and a nervous murmur rippled through the audience. Jamal, dressed in a new but simple suit that Reggie had insisted on, walked slowly down the aisle, pushing Lila's wheelchair. Sarah walked beside them, her head held high, a quiet pride radiating from her. The sight of the trio, walking into the heart of the elite world, created a breathtaking visual contrast. Jamal's broken sneakers, now replaced by polished, but still humble, new ones, moved with a quiet determination. A wave of hushed whispers spread through the room. Then a profound silence. All eyes were on Jamal and Lila. Reggie stepped down from the podium, meeting them halfway. He gently took Lila's hand, his smile warm and genuine. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice filled with an undeniable emotion. This is Jamal and his sister, Lila May. He then turned to Jamal. Jamal, earlier this week, I entrusted you with a task. My vintage Mustang, a car I've cherished for years, was in dire need of repair. You, with your quiet knowledge and your skilled hands, diagnosed its issues, and in less than 48 hours, you had it running perfectly. You refused any payment, simply saying it was your pleasure to help. A gasp rippled through the audience. A homeless teen, fixing a billionaire's classic car, and refusing payment. It was unheard of. Judge Vance, her stern expression softening, leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Jamal. Reggie continued, Jamal represents the countless unsung heroes among us, those with hidden talents and profound dignity, who simply need a chance. And Lila May, he said, turning to the little girl, who is now beaming at the crowd. Lila May is a reminder of the pure, unadulterated joy that exists even in the face of adversity. She is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He then made his announcement. Tonight, I am establishing the Jamal and Lila May Foundation, an initiative dedicated to identifying and supporting young people with hidden talents, providing them with the resources and opportunities they deserve. And Jamal, you will be its first beneficiary, and an integral part of its future. A beat of stunned silence followed his words. Then, slowly, a single person in the back of the room began to clap. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire hall erupted in a thunderous applause, a moment of public admiration that washed over the family like a... One evening, at a small, private ceremony for the Foundation's inaugural scholarship recipients, Reggie watched as Jamal, now taller and more self-assured, gave a short speech. He spoke of the day he met Reggie, the sudden twist of fate that changed his life, and the quiet power of a single act of generosity. He looked directly at Reggie, his eyes filled with immense gratitude. Mr. Hayes, Jamal said, his voice clear and steady, you didn't just give us money or a place to stay. You gave us hope. You reminded us that even in the darkest of times, there are people who see beyond the surface, who recognize the quiet dignity in everyone. As he finished, the room erupted in applause. But it was the silence that followed, a moment of profound respect that truly resonated. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled, Reggie saw a young man, a Marine in his crisp, formal uniform, standing awkwardly near the entrance. He looked out of place, clearly uncomfortable in the opulent setting. An older woman, impeccably dressed and clearly a member of the elite, approached him, her face disapproving. Are you sure you're in the right place, young man? She asked, her voice tinged with disdain. The Marine, his shoulders squaring, simply nodded. Just as the woman was about to say something further, Jamal, catching the exchange from across the room, walked over. Everything all right, sir? He asked the Marine, his voice respectful. The Marine nodded again, a faint blush on his cheeks. just admiring the decor. Jamal, with a knowing glance at the older woman, smiled. Well, you're certainly welcome here. This foundation is for people like us. Then, to the surprise of the older woman, Jamal reached out and clapped the Marine on the shoulder. My father was a Marine, Jamal said, his voice quiet but firm. He taught me that true strength isn't about what you own, but about who you are and what you do for others. The older woman's face flushed, and she mumbled an apology, quickly retreating. The Marine offered Jamal a grateful nod. Reggie, watching from a distance, felt a surge of pride. Jamal, once a homeless teen, was now a young man of quiet power, carrying forward the lesson he had learned. Later that evening, as Ricky walked Jamal and Lila to their car, Jamal pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden figure of a Mustang. I made this for you, Mr. Hayes, he said, handing it to him. A small thank you. And a reminder. Reggie took the carving, his fingers tracing the smooth lines. It was a simple gift, but imbued with immense meaning. It was a tangible representation of a life transformed, a quiet strength acknowledged, and a silent dignity respected. He looked at Jamal, then at Lila, who was sleeping peacefully in her wheelchair, a tiny smile on her face. Thank you, Jamal, Reggie said, his voice husky, with emotion. This means more to me than you'll ever know. He watched as Jamal gently pushed Lila's wheelchair towards their car, Sarah walking beside them, a contented smile on her face. They weren't billionaires, but they walked with a quiet strength, a dignity that surpassed any material wealth. Reggie stood there for a long moment, the wooden carving warm in his hand, as the family drove away, their tail lights disappearing into the night. He had refused to help a homeless teen, until he saw who was sitting in the back of his car. And in that simple act of seeing, everything had changed. He walked back into his mansion, not with the heavy steps of a man returning from a tedious obligation, but with the light, resolute stride of someone who had truly found his purpose, his heart irrevocably melted by a child's hug and a family's quiet courage. The silence of the house, usually a comfort, now held a new, profound meaning, filled with the echoes of lives forever touched, and the quiet promise of a future built on kindness.